Good morning, everyone. My name is Siwan, and I'm the head of the Scaling Award at the Fair Education Alliance. I'll be supporting the session this morning with my colleague Ellie, who is our office manager. A huge welcome to you all to this session on measuring impact during the pandemic. We're really delighted to be joined today by Kristy from Impact Ed and Annie from Khulisa, who are going to be leading this session this morning. We're so excited to have you all here with us at the Impact Festival, which is taking place until the 29th of April, so this Thursday. Please do tweet about the event using hashtag Impact Festival and tagging us at _the FEA. So before we kick off, I just want to share an introduction to the Fair Education Alliance and 2 awards that are open for applications at the moment. As most of you know, the Fair Education Alliance exists because we believe that no child's education success is limited by their socioeconomic background. We are a coalition of over 200 organisations across the business, education and charity sectors who are collectively working to make education fair in England. Now, in addition to our collective action and policy work, we run 3 award programmes to nurture and scale impactful solutions to end educational inequality. One of our programmes is the Scaling Award, which I lead on, and which Impact Ed is one of the winners of for 2020 to 2022. And then we have 2 award programmes that are open currently. And they are collectively awards that support programmes to nurture and scale impactful solutions to end educational equality. And 2 of them are currently open for applications until the 18th of May, so really encourage you to consider applying. Both awards give £15,000 salary contribution and a year's worth of support to anyone who has an idea to make education fair. The FEA members can apply for the Entrepreneurship Award to support innovation within an organisation, and all members of the public can apply for the Innovation Award, which is for early stage innovators to turn a great idea into a thriving initiative. You'll be able to hear a lot more about the awards through the festival, and you can hear from our current portfolio of 10 award winners as they share their experiences. Now, if you've missed any of these sessions to date, we do encourage you to watch the recordings that are available on our website. So I'm going to just stop sharing my screen and we are going to get started on this morning's session. And to kick us off, we'll be breaking you up into groups of 2 or 3 for 5 minutes to get the session started so you can meet fellow members and get acquainted. When in your breakout room, please share your name, organisation and role, and we'd like you to discuss the following question. So the question is, how have your evaluations been affected by the pandemic over the last year? What have you found challenging? Ellie's dropped that into the chat, so you'll be able to access that in your groups, and we're going to send you out for those discussions soon. If you have any challenges or tech issues, please do press the call for help button and we'll be able to pop into your room and support you. Great, so enjoy the networking and we will see you shortly. Welcome back, everyone. I think we have everyone back in the main room. We hope you had a great discussion to kick off your Tuesday morning. So without further ado, I am going to pass over to Kristy and Annie, who are going to take us for the rest of the session. Over to you.
Yes, thank you very much. I had that lovely awkward moment where in the final words and sentences we're like, okay, bye, because 3, 2, 1. So let me share my screen. So in terms of the session today, obviously we've started off with the introductions and the opening questions already. We've sort of divided the session into 2 separate parts. So I'll start off talking a little bit more about some of the challenges and solutions that we've seen through our work over the last year, after which we'll have another discussion or sort of breakout room with small groups. And then Annie will talk a little bit about the specific, very practical examples and experiences of how they've adapted their evaluations at Khulisa this year. So I guess just to get started, a really brief introduction from my side, and then I'll ask Annie to do the same, is so I'm Kristy. I am the head of impact partnerships at Impact Ed. And at Impact Ed, we are a non-profit organization that aims to improve pupil outcomes by addressing the evaluation deficit in the sector. So that's realizing that all this time, resources, money is being spent on these different interventions and programs, but that we're not always necessarily measuring the impact of them. So I work particularly with education organizations. So those are any organizations that work with schools as well as with children or young people in different types of educational settings, informal or formal learning settings, which is the part of our work that I lead on, but we also work directly with schools. So it's a combination of both of those things. And the organizations that we do work with ranges from charities and third sector organizations all the way to edtech companies and universities that work with schools as well. So a real range of organizations. Annie, do you want to say a few words?
Great, thanks, Kristy. Yeah, hi everyone. So I'm Khulisa's head of evidence and impact, and I've been working in M&E and the charity sector for about 11 years now. But just to quickly introduce what Khulisa does as well, for anyone who's not familiar with us, our heritage is South African, and that's where our name comes from, which means to nurture in Zulu. And we support excluded or marginalised young people and the professionals, peers and carers who support them. And our programmes focus on well-being and social and emotional skills, and they're delivered by therapeutically trained facilitators. And we're working with Impact Ed to help build our evidence base around our work in schools. Thanks, Kristy.
Perfect. So let's jump into it then. So in terms of the last year, of course, we've seen many of the evaluations that we deliver, as well as the programs, of course, that the organizations that we work with deliver having moved online or in remote settings. And obviously with that, we really much focused on the topic of this session today. Have come many challenges as well as different types of solutions. And I just want to highlight before we go into that, all these challenges as well as what we call, I don't really want to call them solutions, more like considerations in terms of the different challenges, because it all really depends on context of your program, of your organization, of the people that you're working with. So just to keep that in mind. And that's why I think these discussion sessions that we'll have today are going to be so valuable. I think a lot of the people that are on this call today will have had different experiences over the last year, will have different ways of going about challenges that they've had. So it'll be really good to hear from everyone during the session today. Now, the way that I'm presenting the different challenges here are according to three sort of different sections or categories, as I might refer to them. So the first one is around well-being, and then I'll go into a little bit about qualitative as well as quantitative data collection challenges that you might be facing. So obviously in terms of well-being, I think this has been a big conversation over the last year. Zoom fatigue, I think, is a real thing that we've heard a lot from different people, both within schools as well as everyone else in the world, right? So just a few different things to think about here is that screen fatigue. So are we able to minimize additional screen time where possible? Some of the people that we work with, they've actually explicitly moved to doing some interviews with individuals via phone, just because being able to reduce that screen time as a result of that. Can you combine any evaluation activities in delivery time? So if you're doing a program or you're doing a session online, are you able to combine that into the same session so that you're not asking additional screen time, rather making the most of the ones that you already have planned in as part of your delivery? So those are a few different things to consider as part of that. Of course, we've also heard a lot about workload, especially in schools, and all the different elements of workload demands on teachers as well as pupils throughout this year. So again, thinking closely around aligning those activities with what you're already delivering is really important. And I know that Annie will give a few very practical examples around that as well. And something I think not specifically maybe in terms of well-being, but sort of around the ethical implications of delivering your evaluations online, something that you want to think about is, are you reaching the right people still? Sometimes it can be especially hard to know if you are still reaching those hard to reach pupils because of their home environments. Maybe they don't have access to the same types of technologies as you would expect overall. So really try and think about when doing your evaluations remotely, are you still reaching the same people that you are wanting to reach as part of your work, because it can be easy to miss out on those harder to reach pupils, especially when we're thinking about disadvantaged pupils. There is also a flip side to that, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later as well. We have heard from different organizations that they've actually found moving to a remote setting actually very beneficial for reaching more pupils that they might not otherwise have reached in a face-to-face school setting. So that's an interesting perspective that we can talk a little bit more about in the breakout rooms as well. In terms of quantitative data, I think two of the sort of main concerns that we've heard over the last year throughout different projects is, first of all, around response rates for surveys. I think a lot of organizations were reliant on, or were previously reliant on handing paper surveys during sessions, and you can almost make sure that they fill them in before they leave the room. And while you send that via an email after a session, for example, or through a message, it might be a lot harder to follow up on that. So obviously a few different things to consider here is, while it's always been important to make sure that your survey tools are as concise and accessible as possible, now is of course even more important that you do that. So I know that we have reviewed some of the survey tools of several of our partners that we work with to make sure that they're as concise as possible, to make sure there's higher completion rates. And also making sure that you have a clear plan in place for how to complete that, involve key stakeholders. So especially if you are, if you have a structure, for example, where there is a particular program delivery manager working with class, or if you do have, if you do work closely with teachers or parents, that you actually making sure that they're all involved in that process if you want to capture information for one particular group or the other. So really thinking about who is involved in this process and how could help with chasing those responses. And then again, similarly, it keeps going back to the same point here, make sure that your evaluation is embedded within program activities. And again, that is not even necessarily a particular point for online evaluations only. I think this is key for an evaluation overall, but it becomes even more pertinent in an online or remote setting. And then, of course, we've seen quite some gaps in school health data, so attainment data, behavior and attendance data, for example, that just isn't captured in the same systematic way that it has been before. And again, thinking about different ways that you could be capturing that data. What we've seen a lot is the introduction of additional qualitative data over the last year to supplement any gaps in data, especially around, for example, behavior and attendance. Is it beneficial for your project to actually capture some more data around the implementation of your program and certain impacts around behavior and engagement through qualitative work rather than relying on that quantitative data. And potentially you could be thinking about capturing data from different stakeholders as well. If you're asking small children that are at home, you might want to talk to the parents instead about sort of triangulating that data, or just moving that data point to somebody that's really close to your stakeholder. So that's something to think about. And then lastly, sort of the disruption around qualitative data. I think one of the things to think about here is around safeguarding in online activities. Obviously, a lot of this you will probably have already considered as part of online program delivery, but just make sure you work closely with the schools to have those safeguards in place. Then there's obviously some practicalities around delivering qualitative activities online. Usually we would recommend smaller focus groups to aid better discussion. In person, it's a bit easier to navigate a bigger discussion group and sort of turn taking in terms of the conversation. So generally we would recommend slightly smaller group sizes when you're doing it online. And very simply, things like speaking up and setting those expectations very clearly at the start is really important to aid smooth discussion as part of a discussion group, for example. But obviously, there's lots more different practicalities to consider here that maybe you want to talk about within your breakout rooms as well. And then last but not least, some of the online specific activities might not be as relevant for specific groups of peoples or stakeholders in general. I'm particularly thinking about very young children. You don't really want to put a very young child in front of a camera for a discussion group. That can be quite hard to monitor and missing the word here, but yeah, to do that. So instead, you might want to think about some more play-based or activity types of exercises that might be possible online. And I know that Annie's got a few interesting ideas there as well that she'll be sharing that they actually put in practice. So that's it from my side. So we'll go into a breakout room now for about 10 minutes. And we want you guys to think about if any of these challenges and our solutions resonate with you. And then particularly if you've used some of these before in your own evaluations. And have you used any others? I think it will be especially interesting to hear your own experiences, or to share your own experiences with other people in your group as well. And feel free to use this time to brainstorm any other solutions that you might have to challenges that you're facing. So really try and focus on both of those sides, not just the challenges, but also the solutions, and see if you can give each other some advice around some of this. Annie, you on?
How did I get muted in between leaving a breakout room and entering back? Sorry about that, everyone. So hopefully everyone's back in the main room now and you can see my slides. And just say thank you to Kristy for such a great presentation, and just to also say that we can certainly relate to a lot of the challenges Kristy mentioned here at Khulisa. So as Kristy said, I'll be sharing a couple of the practical ways that we've been adapting at Khulisa. But big disclaimer is that I don't claim that we have all the answers, and I don't claim that we've done anything particularly groundbreaking. And I would love to hear from others in the following breakout sessions as well, because we're definitely still learning. But before I go into what we've changed, I thought I'd outline some of our main challenges and the context that we're operating in. So pre-pandemic, we'd put a lot of thought into our evaluation processes. We were focused on rigorous evaluation with a well-developed theory of change, validated pre and post and follow-up measures, detailed demographics data, alongside qualitative participatory tools. And we were working, well, we still are working with Impact Ed on a longer term evaluation, establishing a comparison group and using schools data quite heavily. So when lockdown hit, Khulisa's programme, which was formerly before the lockdown was an intensive programme face-to-face in school settings, we had to completely translate that and all of our other programmes with professionals and parents to online programmes. And so this threw everything upside down for our evaluation processes. The big changes to the length and intensity of the programme meant that our validated measures, pre and post methodologies, were no longer appropriate because the programme was so much shorter. So we had to come up with other ways of evaluating. So let me just pop on to the next slide. Sorry, give me 1 second. Here we go. So before I go into the tangible, more practical things that we've tried, I just thought I'd talk through some of the key principles that we worked with when we were looking at adapting our evaluation. So first thing we did, because the whole programme had changed, we changed our expectations completely around evaluation, what we would get out of evaluation, what our focus would be, what our response rates would be. We switched our focus away from measuring impact alongside learning to focus much more purely on learning and needs gathering at this point. So we shortened everything as much as possible. you know, in line with what Kristy was saying, we found that a little but often was a much better approach considering the context. And we made sure that no evaluation exercises that we used took more than a couple of minutes to complete. And most of all, as always, we worked with the participants' well-being at the centre. This was much more important during the pandemic than ever, so we wanted to really avoid putting too much of an extractive burden on participants at such a challenging time, especially because in normal times we rely on the relationship that our therapeutically trained facilitators build with participants, and we rely on their expert judgments to ensure that we're doing no harm, we're not re-traumatizing young people through our data collection, and this was much more difficult online. So we really stripped everything back and focused on learning. So here are the few things that we've tried. I just wanted to talk through the different methodologies, like I said, very practical. And these are things that we've tried with either our young person webinar programs or our webinars for parents and carers. And just to give some context again, so we changed our face-to-face intensive wellbeing program to a series of really short webinars with young people that took place with small cohorts of young people over a period of 6 weeks. And that was challenging because young people would drop in and out. We were never sure who was going to turn up to which session. It was during the pandemic. It was a very uncertain time. And obviously the length of that programme and the amount of materials we were able to cover were totally different. So we're talking about 40-minute webinar sessions, and you think the first 10 minutes are getting people to join, overcoming any tech issues, people coming in late, then you're only really left with a 30-minute session. So we really wanted to make sure that our evaluation tools were proportionate with that and didn't take up too much of our delivery time. So the first thing we did, as Kristy had mentioned earlier, one of the main things we did was try to combine our delivery activities with our evaluation activities. So we used the hand exercise, which we really liked, as part of the programme to gather information on how participants, in this case the young people we were working with, were feeling and also responding to the materials and what they were getting out of the materials. And we just found this really simple technique really great because it's participatory, it's fun, it collects some quite useful learning data, and we can trial this exercise at the end of this session with everybody in the last 5 minutes. So you'll just need a pen and paper, and so hopefully everyone's got that available. We also, again, not revolutionary at all, but we really made the most of that Zoom chat box. For us, this worked really well because we were asking simple questions during the online programs, throughout the online programs, and saving that chat box and then performing qualitative analysis on the responses. And we harvested quite a lot of learning, useful feedback in this way. And it was a really accessible format. Everybody was comfortable using the Zoom, well, most people were comfortable using the Zoom chat box. We had really good response rates that way. And then, as I said earlier, we've been also, oh, sorry, no, I was going to talk about the short pulse surveys next, but I'll talk about triangulation. So gathering different perspectives from teachers, from the community organisations that we've been working with, has really helped us to just triangulate any findings that we did gather during our webinar evaluations. So just a quick example to bring this to life and why this works so well for us. One example, so in one of our young person webinars, we had a young girl participating who showed up every week without fail, but she never spoke, never used the chat function, never switched on her camera. We checked in to safeguard, to make sure she was okay, to make sure it was her that was actually there. But in the last webinar, she actually participated using the Zoom chat box. And we shared this back with teachers who were utterly blown away that this girl had participated using the Zoom chat box, because they told us that in school, she absolutely never speaks, never participates. They can't get her to participate in, you know, face-to-face settings. And so that this small action actually represented such a huge jump in progress for her. And being able to put that into context was so important for our learning, and being able to speak to the teachers around her and find out what that meant. And we have actually found through our kind of evaluation activities throughout this period that the remote online programme does actually engage and provide a safe space for a lot of the participants who struggle to engage and participate more in our face-to-face programmes. So that's been a really interesting learning to take forward. And as I mentioned earlier, we've been doing lots of short but often evaluations. So, for example, we've been doing short 4-question digital pulse surveys at the end of or during webinars, just to get a temperature check on how things are going. And this has relied mostly on qualitative information, but it's been quite useful for learning, you know, for example, we'd ask participants, you know, what the webinar was helping them with the most. A very open question, but we actually found that learning new coping skills and building self-confidence came up regularly as responses to that question. And that's really reassuring. It's helped us to make sure that our programme is actually hitting the areas that we're hoping that it hits. Other participants have told us through these surveys that they felt really safe sharing their feelings as part of that programme. And this is also a really important way of, you know, for us to look at our programme quality and programme quality assurance. So we found little but often's worked really well. 3 words as well. This is another technique that we've started using in some programs. We've just started asking participants to provide us with just 3 words, again, midway through or towards the end of a webinar, for what they've learned or how they describe the program or their experience on the program. And we're hoping that over time, this would lead to a bank of words that we can analyze and hunt for themes in. And we love this because, again, it's a really open approach. We avoid putting words in people's mouths. They tell us what they want to tell us, and it can help us find surprises in our evaluation that we would not have found through our quantitative validated measures. And then stories. So this is something that we're in the process of testing out at the moment, but we're integrating the most significant change methodology into our evaluation. It's a great methodology and it's a great learning tool because it's based around stories. Everyone can relate to a good story in some way. And it centres around a specific question, very simple, something like, what's been the most significant change in how you think, feel or act as a result of doing the webinar series with Khulisa? And then that can then go on to generate a series of really short stories of change and details of how those changes have happened if the facilitator probes slightly more. And then another step in the methodology is where the stories are then presented back to the participants themselves. And you can also use those stories within the delivery team or share with partners. But then there's a selection process where the people who are participating vote for the story that they believe best represents the changes that a certain programme is aiming to achieve. And this process of voting sparks some really interesting discussion and really interesting debate. And we found it to be a great learning tool. And it can again be integrated quite well into programme delivery activities and reflective practice. It's more relevant, I would say, for a longer initiative. So for us, for our webinar series that have been happening over a 6-week period, rather than a one-off webinar. And we're taking this methodology forward as we transition back into face-to-face delivery as well, back on our usual programmes. And then lastly, working with parents, we knew that they had Zoom fatigue and survey fatigue, but we knew that they were sick of being asked what they wanted and what they needed, but we did need to collect more information on their needs as well as looking at how well they were engaging with the programme. So instead of just using one long evaluation form at the end of the intervention where most people drop off because it's an online intervention, we decided to pepper really short polling questions throughout the webinar using Mentimeter. And so for anyone who's not familiar with Mentimeter, I'd Google it. It's a fantastic software. It's free to use and it's great for polling. And this got us more than double the response rates than our short survey at the end of the webinar got. And the great benefit of Mentimeter as well is that we were able to share the results live with parents as they came in. So it was a more engaging tool as well. And we got some really useful information about how parents were finding the webinar, what they were getting out of it, what their needs and priorities were. So this is just a really quick snapshot of some of the things that we've done that have worked quite well. We've been able to actually, when bringing all of this data together, to tell quite a powerful story of the work we've done during the pandemic. It's not allowed us to necessarily prove a causal relationship between the outcomes identified in our intervention. It's very different from what our approach was and what our approach is for face-to-face delivery and our usual programmes. But for Khulisa, it's been a proportional, pragmatic, relevant response for us during this time. because this was a new programme, so we really needed to focus on learning. And most importantly, it has led to valuable internal learning and quality assurance of the programme. And as I've said as well, we've really enjoyed this. We've really enjoyed trialling these new methodologies. So that's a quick whirlwind tour from me of the very practical things that we've done during the pandemic, but it'd be great to hear more about what you guys have done. And we thought we'd flip this question around. So rather than focusing on challenges, which we've discussed quite a lot already, it would be great to hear from you what some of the benefits might have been to measuring impact remotely. Do you have any particular examples from your own experiences? So you'll be in breakout groups, but different groups, I think, this time round, so we can all learn from as many different perspectives as possible. And I'm not sure how long we've got left, how we're doing for time. Maybe about 10 minutes for this session.
I think we probably said about 6 minutes.
6 minutes, perfect. Brilliant. Well, as a last exercise, as promised, I really wanted us to try the hand exercise. So if anyone here has got a piece of paper and a pen, it'd be great to try this out with you guys. So we'd like you to just put your paper down and plonk your hand on it and just trace around your hand with your pen. So draw your hand on the piece of paper, and I'll do it as we go along as well. And here we are. And so then you'll come up with your hand on the paper, and then I will just quickly share my screen so you can see the questions that we'd like you to answer. Let me make sure that I get this. There we go, so hopefully you can see that. So the top reflection, what have been the most helpful solutions that you've heard about today? So we'd really like you to draw on your fingers and thumb, just write up to 5 top reflections, ideas, solutions that you've heard about today. So just on those fingers and thumb, and that thumb. Doesn't have to be 5, could be 3, just as many as you've taken away. And then in the middle, in the palm of your hand, we'd really love it if you could write your key takeaway from this session, anything that you plan to implement or take forward, any changes you might make as a result of this session. And then we'd really love it if you could share these hand drawings on Twitter so we could see them using the hashtag Impact Festival and tagging the FEA, Impact Tag tweets and Khulisa UK. We'd really love to see what you guys have come up with, but I just wanted to show that in practice just in case it's useful for integrating into any of your kind of evaluation activities and sessions. So that's it from me. Thank you all so much.
You're on mute, Siwan.
Thanks, Ellie. Thank you so much to Annie and Kristy for leading us through a brilliant high energy session to kick off the day. Can I just ask everyone please to join me and come off mute and give them both a huge round of applause. And a little booth thrown in there, which I love. So thank you both for that session. We're just going to activate a poll now. Ellie, if you could start that off for me, please. Your feedback is invaluable to us, especially since this is the first time we're running the Impact Festival. So please feel free to send us any additional feedback or thoughts to fea.events@faireducation.org.uk. But in the meantime, we'd like to get your immediate feedback on this session. So 4 questions there. You can see answers coming in already. Some of you will be really familiar with this survey by now, but I do really value your feedback for every session that you attend. Okay, we can see about 1/3 of those in. Going up quickly, the first question is on the overall session, second on the session leads, then on to the favourite part and how it increased your awareness or knowledge. Great, those are in. So just to kind of flag a couple of events coming up, but you can see the full details on our timetable. But this afternoon we have a great session on minding the gap, really looking at racial or addressing racial inequalities head on, and tomorrow we have a session on scaling systemically for long-term change. But you can see all of the sessions on this timetable, which I'll put in the chat right now here. So thank you again to Kristy and to Annie, and thank you to all of you for joining us. We hope you are able to join us for a session soon.